This prophecy seemed nearly impossible to believe back then. But in 2026, we are seeing the stark truth of it unfold before our very eyes. Bulgaria, the nation Baba Vanga so cryptically described, is not only struggling, but is on the verge of what many experts call demographic collapse. And the warnings she left behind are eerily accurate. The most unsettling part of Baba Vanga's prophecy was the prediction that this nation would lose all its people, that its cities would be empty, and its ancient culture would fade away as if it never existed. At the time she made these predictions, the world seemed to be on an irreversible path toward growth, prosperity, and development. But as we stand in 2026, the harsh reality is that Bulgaria's population is dwindling at a rapid pace. Its schools are closing down due to a lack of children. Its hospitals are operating at a fraction of their capacity, and its towns are becoming ghost towns. This isn't just a result of economic decline or war. This is a deep societal shift, one that involves the very fabric of what it means to be a nation. With a birth rate lower than replacement levels and millions of people leaving for better opportunities abroad, Bulgaria's fate is a haunting reflection of the larger trend affecting many parts of Europe and beyond. The numbers speak for themselves. In the span of just a few decades, Bulgaria has lost nearly 25% of its population. In 1990, the country boasted nearly 9 million people. But today, that number has dwindled to just over 6.5 million. Projections suggest that by 2050, Bulgaria's population will shrink to around 5 million. And by 2100, it could dip below 2.25 million. This isn't a matter of political instability or military conflict. It's a demographic disaster brought on by the slow but steady decline in birth rates and the mass exodus of people seeking a better life elsewhere. But the most chilling aspect is that these projections, based on current trends, assume that the situation will stabilize. If nothing changes, Bulgaria could become a living ghost town, a country that technically exists on the map but has lost its essence. Baba Vanga's warning was never just about the numbers. She spoke of a society that had lost its connection to life itself. She foresaw a land where people would forget the very act of procreation and where the spirit of a nation would wither away. And today, we can see the terrifying truth of her words. In Bulgaria, as in many other parts of Eastern Europe, the collective spirit has been fading for decades. The country once thrived under communism, with its factories, industries, and centralized structure providing a sense of stability. But with the fall of the Soviet Union and the transition to a more globalized, capitalist economy, many Bulgarians began to lose their sense of purpose. Economic opportunities dwindled, and people became disillusioned with the future. This loss of hope, this disconnection from a meaningful existence, is what Baba Vanga saw as the root cause of the nation's eventual demise. The loss of hope in Bulgaria isn't just a mental or emotional crisis, it's deeply tied to the nation's demographic collapse. According to psychologists and demographers, when people lose faith in the future, they lose their desire to bring new life into the world. The idea of having children, of passing on a legacy to the next generation, becomes less appealing when the future seems uncertain, bleak, and disconnected from any higher purpose. This is a pattern that can be seen in other parts of Eastern Europe as well, including Ukraine, Serbia, Bosnia, and Latvia. These nations, too, are experiencing the same demographic decline, with birth rates plummeting and young people fleeing for better opportunities abroad. But it's Bulgaria that has become the poster child for this phenomenon, the first country to reach the point of no return. For years, experts have been warning about the consequences of low birth rates, particularly in Eastern Europe. But Baba Vanga saw this coming long before anyone else. She understood that this wasn't just a numbers game, it was a spiritual and existential crisis that would eventually engulf entire nations. In her vision, Bulgaria wasn't just facing a demographic collapse, it was experiencing a collapse of the soul. People had lost touch with the deeper meaning of life, and as a result, they stopped bringing new life into the world. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding a reason to live, to create, to build for the future. And yet, the most unsettling part of Baba Vanga's prophecy is not the demographic collapse itself, but the reasons behind it. She foresaw a society that would become so consumed with individualism, materialism, and short-term survival that it would forget the sacredness of life. In her vision, this was not just a national problem, it was a global one. Baba Vanga's prophecies extended beyond Bulgaria to the entire world, warning that the same patterns would spread across Europe and eventually the rest of the world. As we look around at the state of modern society, it's impossible not to see the reflection of her words. Increasingly, people are losing their connection to a higher purpose. The global rise of loneliness, depression, and existential anxiety speaks to a deeper malice, a spiritual emptiness that is driving people to disconnect not just from each other, but from the very idea of a shared future. Today, we are living in a time when individualism, materialism, and the pursuit of personal success have become the dominant cultural forces. People are more focused on short-term gratification than on building lasting legacies. The idea of family, of raising children, of contributing to a future that extends beyond oneself has become secondary to personal ambition and self-fulfillment. This cultural shift, this loss of connection to something larger than the self, is precisely what Baba Vanga warned about. She saw a time when societies would conquer the material world but lose their souls in the process. Baba Vanga's vision of a disappearing nation is not just a story of one country's demise, but a cautionary tale for the rest of the world. While the situation in Bulgaria serves as the clearest example, her warnings extended to a broader pattern, one that affects many nations today. This isn't just about the loss of a population. It's about the collapse of a civilization that has lost its connection to life itself, its purpose, and its future. Baba Vanga's prophecy was never about a simple demographic shift. It was about the spiritual crisis that underpins it, a crisis that is accelerating right before our eyes. Bulgaria, the nation at the heart of her prophecy, has already seen its population decrease dramatically. The country once had a population of nearly 9 million people in 1989, but today it has just over 6.5 million. The decline is not just because of people leaving for better opportunities abroad, but also because of a critical drop in birth rates. According to United Nations projections, by 2050, Bulgaria's population could shrink to 5 million. And by 2100, it could dip below 2.25 million. These numbers are staggering, and yet they are only projections. If trends continue, Bulgaria faces a future of functional extinction, a nation that exists on the map but no longer in reality. It is a country without children, without young people, and without the cultural continuity that sustains a civilization. The situation in Bulgaria is not isolated. While Bulgaria is the most extreme case, other Eastern European countries are experiencing similar demographic crises. Ukraine, Serbia, Bosnia, Latvia, and Lithuania are all facing declining populations, though none of them are shrinking as quickly as Bulgaria. And the problem isn't confined to Eastern Europe. Across Europe, birth rates are plummeting, and many nations are seeing their populations age at an alarming rate. In 2026, the problem is no longer just a local issue. It's a global one. From South Korea to Italy, from Spain to Japan, birth rates are falling at unprecedented rates. The world is facing what some experts are calling a silent extinction, and this crisis will have far-reaching consequences for future generations. Baba Vanga foresaw this collapse not just in terms of numbers, but as a crisis of spirit. She predicted a time when societies would lose their drive for the future, a time when people would forget how to create life. In her vision, nations would become so consumed with individual survival and material gain that they would forget the deeper purpose of existence. This spiritual emptiness would lead to a demographic collapse, a cycle of decline that no amount of policy or economic incentives could reverse. And this is exactly what we are witnessing today. Societies that once thrived on shared purpose, on communal bonds, and on the idea of creating a future for the next generation are now crumbling under the weight of spiritual disconnection. The reasons for this crisis are multifaceted, but they all stem from a deeper cultural shift. Over the last few decades, there has been a profound change in how people view life, purpose, and family. In many developed countries, the idea of having children is no longer seen as a sacred or essential act. It has become, for many, an optional lifestyle choice, one that is often put off or entirely abandoned in favor of personal freedom, career success, and self-fulfillment. The notion that children are a blessing and a continuation of the family's legacy has been replaced by the idea that they are an obstacle to individual freedom. In Bulgaria, this shift has been particularly pronounced. With the collapse of the communist regime in 1990, the old social structures that gave people a sense of purpose began to crumble. The factories, the jobs, the community ties that had once held the country together all disappeared, and in their place was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The younger generation, disillusioned with the future, began leaving the country in droves, seeking better opportunities in Western Europe. Those who stayed behind were often left with a sense of hopelessness, unable to see a future worth building. As a result, the birth rate plummeted and the cycle of decline began. This loss of hope and purpose is not just an emotional or psychological issue. It is at the core of the demographic crisis. When people no longer believe in the future, they stop bringing new life into the world. The birth rate in Bulgaria is now the lowest in Europe, with an average of just 1.1 children per woman, far below the replacement level of 2.1. In rural areas, the situation is even worse. There are entire villages where not a single child has been born in over a decade. Schools have been forced to close their doors due to a lack of students, and in some cases, entire towns have become abandoned ghost towns. The death toll continues to rise, and with fewer young people remaining to support the aging population, the healthcare system is under extreme strain. Elderly citizens are often left to fend for themselves, as their children have long since migrated to other countries in search of better prospects. The same pattern is playing out across much of Eastern Europe, where the collapse of the Soviet Union and the transition to a market economy has left people feeling disconnected from their cultural roots and their collective identity. Without the stability and support of the old system, many nations in the region have found themselves adrift, their societies fraying at the edges. In the case of Bulgaria, the collapse of the communist regime left a vacuum of purpose and identity. The older generations had grown up with a sense of stability, even if that stability was imposed from above. But when the regime fell, there was nothing to take its place. The country transitioned into a capitalist economy, but the economic opportunities didn't materialize for the majority of people. Unemployment rose, poverty deepened, and the sense of hope that had once sustained the population evaporated. As a result, the birth rate plummeted, and many Bulgarians chose to leave the country in search of a better life. Today, Bulgaria is facing what some experts call the demographic point of no return, a situation so dire that even the most optimistic projections predict that the country's population will continue to shrink with little hope of recovery. As the spiritual and demographic collapse Baba Vanga predicted continues to unfold in Eastern Europe, particularly in Bulgaria, the unsettling reality of a prophecy takes on new significance. This isn't just about a single nation. It's about a broader pattern that speaks to the fate of entire civilizations. The truth behind her words becomes clearer with every passing year as countries across Europe face the same existential dilemma: How can a society survive and thrive when it loses its connection to purpose, to life, and to the future? The demographic crisis in Bulgaria has accelerated in recent decades. The country is experiencing a shocking decline in its population, driven not by external forces like war or natural disasters, but by internal factors. People are simply not having children. The birth rate has dropped to one of the lowest levels in Europe, with the average Bulgarian woman having just 1.1 children, far below the replacement rate of 2.1. The result is a rapidly aging population, where more than half the people are over the age of Pantalis, and within 2 decades, the majority will be over Pansat. This demographic imbalance creates an economic and social crisis, with fewer working-age individuals to support an aging population. The implications of this shift are staggering, not just for Bulgaria, but for the entire European continent. The challenges facing Bulgaria today are a harbinger of what lies ahead for much of the developed world. Baba Vanga foresaw this collapse, not just in terms of population decline, but as a result of a deeper, more spiritual issue. She described a society that would forget how to create life, a society that would lose its drive for the future. As we look at Bulgaria and other nations experiencing demographic collapse, we begin to understand what she meant. It's not just about birth rates, it's about the loss of hope, the absence of a collective vision for the future. When people lose their belief in a meaningful future, they stop bringing new life into the world. The birth rate drops, and a cycle of decline begins. This cycle is not just a demographic issue, it's a cultural, psychological, and spiritual crisis. The fundamental question is, why has this happened? Why has the world's most advanced civilizations, with their technology, education, and wealth, suddenly lost the desire to reproduce? The answer lies in the values that have come to dominate these societies. Over the past several decades, there has been a massive cultural shift. In place of communal values, where family and future generations were considered central to society, the dominant narrative has become one of extreme individualism. People have become focused on self-fulfillment, personal success, and short-term pleasure. The idea of having children as a way of contributing to a larger purpose, to creating a better world for future generations, has been replaced by a view that children are obstacles to personal freedom and achievement. In Bulgaria, this shift has been particularly pronounced since the fall of communism in 1990. The old regime, despite its many flaws, had given the country a sense of stability, purpose, and identity. It provided a clear narrative about who the Bulgarians were and what they stood for. But when the regime collapsed, so too did the sense of purpose. The transition to a market economy didn't bring the prosperity that many hoped for, and instead, it left behind a void. The younger generation, disillusioned with the promises of the new system, began to leave in search of better opportunities in Western Europe. Those who stayed behind found themselves grappling with a deep sense of uncertainty, unable to see a way forward. This loss of hope, combined with a culture that began to prioritize individual success over collective well-being, led to a sharp decline in the birth rate. This spiritual crisis is not confined to Bulgaria, though. The patterns of demographic decline and cultural fragmentation are spreading across Eastern Europe, and they are now reaching the more developed parts of the world. Western Europe, including Italy, Spain, and Germany, is experiencing similar trends, with birth rates falling to dangerously low levels. The same is true for Japan and South Korea, two of the most technologically advanced nations in the world. Across the globe, the decline in birth rates is creating a demographic time bomb that is only beginning to explode. Baba Vanga's prophecy about a coldness that would descend on society, spiritual coldness, a disconnection from the purpose of life, has proven eerily accurate. The world, for all its technological advancements and material comforts, has become spiritually disconnected. People are increasingly isolated, more connected to their devices than to each other. They're more concerned with short-term pleasures than with building a meaningful future. And as this disconnection deepens, the desire to create new life wanes. People are asking themselves, why should we have children in a world that feels so uncertain, so unstable, so spiritually empty? But Baba Vanga didn't just predict the demographic collapse, she also foresaw the possibility of a solution. She didn't view this crisis as humanity's inevitable end, but as a test, an opportunity for spiritual rebirth. She saw a future where people would reconnect with the sacredness of life, where the act of bringing new life into the world would be recognized as a divine act, not a burden. According to her vision, this awakening would not come from governments or institutions, but from individuals, from a grassroots spiritual movement that would reconnect humanity with its purpose. This spiritual awakening, Baba Vanga believed, would begin in the 2020s, at a time when the crisis of meaning would reach its peak. This is the decade when humanity will have to make a choice whether to continue down the path of spiritual emptiness and demographic decline, or to awaken to a deeper purpose. The awakening will come from individuals who recognize that life is not just about consumption, survival, or personal success. It's about creating a future, passing on traditions, and contributing to the continuation of the human story. It's about remembering that children are not obstacles to personal freedom, but a sacred responsibility, a link to the future. This awakening, however, will not be easy. It will require a massive cultural shift, a revolution in values. It will require people to rethink what it means to live a fulfilling life. It will require the return of communities, the recognition that life is not just about individual success, but about the well-being of the collective. As Baba Vanga predicted, the awakening will come in 3 waves, and we are already in the first wave. The first wave, affecting Eastern Europe, is already underway. The second wave, impacting Western Europe and developed Asia, will come in the 2030s. And the third wave, affecting the rest of the world, will occur around 2060. The demographic crisis in Bulgaria and the rest of Eastern Europe is not just a warning for those countries. It's a warning for the entire world. If we do not address the underlying spiritual crisis that is driving this decline, if we continue to prioritize individualism, materialism, and short-term pleasure over the greater good, we will face the same fate. This is the pattern that Baba Vanga saw, and it is one that we cannot ignore. But if we can awaken to a deeper sense of purpose, if we can reconnect with the sacredness of life and the importance of creating a future for the next generation, we can reverse the trends and build a future worth living for. The question now is, will we awaken in time? Baba Vanga's prophecy was not about predicting the future with certainty. It was about showing humanity the path ahead. She gave us the map, but we must choose whether to follow it. The choices we make in this decade will determine the future of humanity. We have the power to change the course of history, to reconnect with our deeper purpose, and build a future that is spiritually rich, meaningful, and sustainable. As we move forward into the next phase of this journey, we must ask ourselves, are we ready for the awakening that Baba Vanga predicted? Are we willing to reconnect with the sacredness of life and remember why we are here? The future of humanity depends on the choices we make today. Stay tuned for the next part, where we will explore the signs of spiritual awakening that Baba Vanga foresaw and what they mean for the future of the world. The path is clear, but the ending is still unwritten. It's up to us to choose. As we continue exploring Baba Vanga's chilling prophecy about the disappearance of nations, particularly Bulgaria, it's becoming increasingly evident that this is not just a national crisis, it's a global warning. The crisis she saw isn't just about the numbers, but the profound spiritual disconnection that underlies the demographic decline. When Baba Vanga spoke of a nation vanishing from the map, she wasn't just referring to a physical disappearance. She was pointing to a deeper, more insidious loss: the loss of purpose, the loss of the drive to create life, to bring new generations into the world, and to build a future. In the previous parts of this exploration, we've seen the grim reality of Bulgaria's demographic collapse. With a rapidly aging population, a declining birth rate, and millions of people leaving the country for better opportunities, Bulgaria is facing what some call functional extinction. This is not a result of war or natural disasters, but a slow, silent process driven by a loss of hope and a spiritual emptiness that is spreading across much of Eastern Europe and beyond. What began as a national issue has now become a warning for the rest of the world. And it's not just Bulgaria. Many countries are on the brink of a similar fate. Baba Vanga's prophecy was never just about one country. She foresaw a time when the collective spirit of nations would fade, when societies would lose their drive for the future, and when the sacredness of life itself would be forgotten. And as we look around at the world today, we see signs of this happening. The rising rates of loneliness, depression, and existential anxiety in developed nations are symptoms of a deeper malice. People are increasingly disconnected from each other, from their communities, and from a higher purpose. We live in a world that is more connected than ever through technology, but we are more spiritually isolated than at any point in history. This disconnection is the root cause of the demographic crisis. When people lose their sense of meaning, they stop bringing new life into the world. It's not just about the material world or economic survival. It's about the spiritual essence that drives societies to create, to build, and to pass on their cultures and legacies. Bulgaria's case is particularly striking because it is the most extreme example of this trend. The country's population has shrunk dramatically since 1989, when it had nearly 9 million people. Today, it has just over 6.5 million, and projections suggest that by 2050, the population could fall to 5 million, and by 2100, it could be as low as 2.25 million. But these projections are based on the assumption that the trend will stabilize. If nothing changes, Bulgaria's population could continue to spiral downward, leaving behind a country with no children, no young people, and no cultural continuity. And this is not just a demographic issue, it's a social and spiritual one. When people lose faith in the future, they stop having children. They stop building for the next generation. The result is a demographic collapse, and the cycle becomes self-perpetuating. But Bulgaria is not alone in this. Across Eastern Europe, countries like Ukraine, Serbia, Bosnia, Latvia, and Lithuania are experiencing similar demographic declines. The patterns are clear, and they all point to these same underlying causes: a loss of hope, a loss of purpose, and a loss of connection to something greater than the self. In many of these countries, the collapse of the Soviet Union left a vacuum of identity. The stability and sense of purpose that people had under the old regime disappeared, and in its place came uncertainty, instability, and disillusionment. The younger generation, seeing no future in their homeland, left for better opportunities abroad, and those who stayed behind were often left without the motivation to create the next generation. In Bulgaria, this shift has been particularly pronounced. After the fall of communism, the country transitioned into a market economy, but the economic opportunities didn't materialize for the majority of people. Unemployment rose, and the country's once strong industrial base crumbled. As a result, many people left for Western Europe, and those who stayed behind were left with a sense of hopelessness. The birth rate began to plummet, and the demographic collapse began in earnest. This spiritual crisis, however, is not just limited to Eastern Europe. As Baba Vanga predicted, the collapse is spreading. In Western Europe and developed Asia, birth rates are also falling at an alarming rate. In countries like Italy, Spain, Germany, South Korea, and Japan, the birth rate has dropped to dangerously low levels, and the population is aging rapidly. In these countries, the demographic decline is creating a crisis of its own, with an increasing number of elderly people relying on a shrinking workforce to support them. But this is not just about economics, it's about something much deeper. As societies become more technologically advanced, more materialistic, and more focused on individual success, they lose their connection to a greater purpose. The idea of family, of raising children, and of contributing to future generations has been replaced by a culture of instant gratification, short-term pleasure, and individual achievement. Baba Vanga foresaw this spiritual emptiness and the demographic collapse that would follow. She warned that societies would become so consumed with individualism and materialism that they would forget the sacredness of life. She saw a future where people would stop bringing children into the world because they no longer saw the purpose in doing so. And this is precisely what we are witnessing today. The question is, what can we do about it? Is there a way out of this demographic crisis? Or is it too late? The solution, according to Baba Vanga, is not political or economic, it's spiritual. She predicted that humanity would experience an awakening, a return to the sacredness of life, and a reconnection with the deeper purpose of existence. This awakening would not come from governments or institutions, but from individuals. It would be a grassroots movement, a spiritual revolution that would reconnect people with the idea that life is sacred, and that having children is not just a biological act, but a divine one. According to Baba Vanga, this awakening would begin in the 2020s, at a time when the crisis of meaning would reach its peak. This is the decade when humanity will have to make a choice whether to continue down the path of spiritual emptiness and demographic decline, or to awaken to a deeper purpose. Baba Vanga's prophecy was not about doom and gloom. It was about a choice, a moment of awakening that could change the course of history. The future of humanity, according to her, would depend on whether people could reconnect with the sacredness of life, with the idea that life is more than just survival and pleasure. The awakening, she believed, would come in 3 waves. The first wave is already upon us, affecting Eastern Europe. The second wave will hit Western Europe and developed Asia in the 2030s. And the third wave will affect the rest of the world, including countries like Mexico, Brazil, and India, around 2060. These 3 waves will determine the future of humanity. The question is, which wave will we be part of? The spiritual awakening that Baba Vanga foresaw is already starting to take root. People around the world are beginning to question the materialistic, individualistic culture that has dominated for so long. They are seeking deeper meaning, reconnecting with their spiritual roots, and rediscovering the importance of family, community, and future generations. This awakening is happening in small pockets, in intentional communities, in local support networks, and in movements that promote sustainable living and a return to traditional values. These are the first signs of the revolution that Baba Vanga predicted. But the real question remains, will this awakening be enough to reverse the trends of demographic decline and spiritual emptiness? Will humanity wake up in time to change the course of history? Or will we continue on the path of self-destruction? The next few decades will be critical. If we fail to reconnect with our deeper purpose, if we continue to prioritize individual success over the well-being of future generations, the collapse that Baba Vanga predicted will continue. But if enough people awaken to the sacredness of life, if we embrace the idea that the future is a gift and that we have a responsibility to create it, we can change the future. The choice is ours. In the next part of this series, we will explore the specific signs of spiritual awakening that Baba Vanga predicted and how they are beginning to manifest in the world today. This is not just about one nation, it's about the future of all of humanity. Stay tuned as we continue this deep dive into the prophecy of Baba Vanga and the solution she saw for humanity's survival. The time for awakening is now. The question is, are we ready?